Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Recovery Stories. We are so glad that you're here and hope that you stick around for the rest of this episode to hear this wonderful story of recovery. For those of you new to this vlog, my name is Patrick Custer, and I'm your host. This is going to be an hour of hearing recovery, a story of addiction, trauma, and recovery. And our guests on this show will talk about very serious things and sometimes troubling to hear, but very important nonetheless. So I just want you all to know that get ready for the ride, because that's exactly what it is. But they always end in a wonderful, beautiful way. And I'm so excited for you all to hear the story of our guest today right after this message. We are live in
Facebook,
where a number of people
the opportunity to share.
She's one of our own.
They aren't like
Parts to your story that's awesome. You found healing. You found,
until I got sober.
Can't wait for her to share the different aspects of your story and what. Awesome.
Right.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm so excited to get going today with our guest, Emily. Emily, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time.
Of course.
With that, I will say, Emily, I've known for quite some time, and in recovery and here in Nashville, Tennessee. And she is just a beaming light of joy and someone who has helped countless people find their way to the doors of hope and recovery. And I know that her story and sharing her story today is going to do nonetheless. So I'm so excited to get to it. Enough of me talking, Emily. I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Sure. So Patrick and I talked a little bit this morning about where to start. So I'm just going to start at the beginning. So I was born and raised in a small town in West Virginia, very similar to Mayberry. I think there were 2, maybe 3 stoplights, probably 4 police officers in the whole, police force, if that's what you want to call them. I was raised by a family with good Christian values, and I was afforded an opportunity to be raised in a church that was not hellfire and brimstone. Right. We were pure love and no judgment. Like I had wonderful parents who believed and instilled in me what unconditional love was. Right. And that was something that I took for granted for a long time. I did not realize until my early adult life that a lot of people weren't afforded that opportunity. Mm-hmm. My dad read stories and told stories every night. My mom read us books. My parents played board games with us. We were the Huxtables in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And my mom was a nurse. My dad worked in coal refining chemicals, which is a whole nother story.
Oh, wow.
But, we were a very upper middle class family in a lower middle class town. So I went to private school until I was in 6th grade. I went to public school in 7th grade and was in culture shock, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Things that I never had experienced, like racial tension and segregation. I went to a private school. We were all on the same socioeconomic platform, so that was new to me. Mm. And I got really confused, right, at why people were treated differently because they were different. Yeah. So that's where I leaned. I leaned into that. I learned to explore different cultures and different avenues of life, and I wanted to be around. I loved learning about other people's situations and stories. And I to this day that's something I'm very passionate about. My dad, when I was probably 15, started venturing to Colombia, South America several times a year as a missionary. And it was like we were the perfect family, except we weren't. Mm-hmm. Right? My dad has a long torrid history of mental health in his family, and my mom has a long torrid history of alcoholism and addiction. Mm-hmm. And so they tried, in the 70s and 80s, you thought if you got far enough away from them, they wouldn't be affected by that. Right? Mm-hmm. I never saw my parents drink. I never saw them smoke. I never saw them take illicit drugs, ever. But that didn't stop. That the cycle didn't stop because I wasn't exposed to it, right? And it wasn't until I was probably in my early 20s and was diagnosed with bipolar 1 myself and substance use disorder that it was brought to my attention that my grandmother and my father's brother, my uncle, both took their own lives.
Wow.
And I didn't know that. They tried to protect us from that. It was your grandmother was sick. She died when I was young. My brother was, my uncle, my dad's brother, I'm speaking from his voice. My dad's brother was 18 or 19 when he took his life. I think I was 1. So I have no conscious memory of it, and just kind of blown over. And my parents were married 2 weeks after his mother took her own life. They just moved on like it, and I guess in the 60s, what you did. And I don't think anyone could have determined in 1979 when I was born, in 1985 when I started showing signs that I was a little bit different, all the way up until 1999, 2000, when I was diagnosed with bipolar, that would have affected his children, right? I don't think anybody could have at that time recognized that.
Yeah.
So life is about, learning, and sometimes you have to learn in really uncomfortable ways. And I think that was hard for them to wrap their brain around, that sure. Something they worked so hard to keep me away from, all of us away from, was in their face.
Yeah.
I found drugs at probably 16. I smoked pot. I drank. I did all the normal things a little bit earlier than I think, because I had older sisters, right? And it was a way to keep me from telling on them as if I participated. But I was probably 16 the first time I did methamphetamine.
Wow.
And maybe a little younger. And it was 18 when I found cocaine, which was the longest love affair of my life. I had a psychiatrist when I was 21, who is the one who diagnosed me with bipolar. And she said there are 2 types of people with that diagnosis. Ones that are on drugs and ones that haven't found them yet.
Wow.
And it made sense to me that if I didn't take care of my mental health, that was always going to play a huge role. But I still wasn't quite ready to accept the diagnoses that it was going to be with me for the rest of my life. I didn't. Sure. I wasn't ready.
That's a really hard thing to. Nobody. How can you be prepared for something like that?
Right. And, on one hand, they're telling me this is chronic, it's never going away. And on the other hand, they're saying, but this is the solution, right? There is a solution, but I couldn't hear that. I couldn't hear the solution part of it. All I heard was the problem. So I ran from that for many, 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 many years.
And just to note there too, for, just to help everybody who's listening, put this in perspective mentally. What year was this?
2001. So
think about, not everybody necessarily has been on the scene with mental health issues and things since 2001, but I for one can tell you in 2001, we had not made nearly the progress that we've made now with breaking the stigma for mental health disorders. So receiving a diagnosis like that was very different in 2001, 20 years ago, than it would be today.
100%.
How it was perceived.
And it seems like it seems like every time you turned around, somebody new was getting diagnosed with bipolar, right? So it was like this kind of, and I don't want to discredit or disregard anyone's mental health diagnosis by any stretch of the imagination, but I have met a lot of people in the last 10 years that have said, yeah, this was my diagnosis. And then they figured out it was really trauma or it was this. That. So I was playing that card, right? I was still holding that to the breast that maybe I'm one of those ones, even though I have this family history, even though it's documented from all the way back to the 50s of mental health diagnoses in my family. Maybe it's just something else. Maybe that's not really it. So that was really, that was something that I ran from for a long time. And of course, when you're running from something, you always run into something else. And I found my home in cocaine, and I found my home in bartending and being part of this world and creating this persona, this image of a person that was in no way, shape, or form real. I was just a scared little girl that didn't want anybody to know it. Right. So I got involved with selling drugs and doing things outside of my character that I had only seen in movies. Right. I participated in a lot of things because I thought it helped me with my image. Right. Like my parents never had a gun in their life. I got my first pistol when I was 24 because I thought it was cool. Right. Because I thought that changed. Like that said something like that was a sign of respect. Come on. But at that time, first of all, young adults think they know everything, right? And I'm one of the young adults that thought I knew everything. And I thought that I had the world figured out. And I think I pushed the envelope to the point that, trauma started coming into play. I was sexually assaulted several times in my persistence of being this person that I wasn't. I was playing, in a world that I had no experience in. I was hanging out in the projects in parts of town that I had only seen on the movies. But I wanted to be a part of that, and I would do anything I had to do to be a part of that. And it created this whirlwind cycle, the roller coaster of trauma has happened, so I have to use to cover up the pain, which incurs more trauma, which incurs more using, which incurs more trauma, which incurs more using, right? And it's this perpetual cycle. It's the roller coaster, the merry-go-round that you just can't get off of, or I couldn't. I started, my first treatment was when I was 26. Is it okay for me to say the names of treatment centers?
Sure.
Okay. So my first treatment center when I was 26 was a place called the Cairn Foundation in Reading, Pennsylvania. It was a very eye-opening and wonderful experience. But I knew when I was there that I had no intentions of staying clean.
Yeah.
I knew it was a great break. I knew I was going to put a little weight on and eat good food and do all the things and show my ass, and people were still going to tell me how fabulous I was. And then I was going to go home and do what I was going to do. And that's what I did. I just thought this was an opportunity to learn how to do it better, right? Do it more successfully. And that didn't work. And so it took about probably 90 days for my life to crumble again. And some more trauma happened. I was in the projects, and we were running dope, and there was a gentleman that was beside my car getting ready to enter my car, and he was shot in the head and killed.
Wow.
And so all that tough shit that I thought I was, like that, I was done at that point. And that's when I went to the ranch, and I spent 4 months at the ranch. Can I say names?
Of staff people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I spent 4 months at the ranch, and Dawn Zerlinden was the therapist there at the time. I don't think she's not there anymore, is she?
Yeah, no, I think she's working in another facility.
Yeah. Well, she is the human lie detector, number one. And number two, she saw the little girl in me, and she was never willing to entertain the facade, the persona. And that and in that, she let me know that that little girl was okay. It was okay to be her, right? I was in a safe place to work on some of that stuff and be the scared person that I was, and show my fear and my grief and all the feelings that I had refused to entertain for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for 4 months. I intended to stay for 28 days. And I was there for 4 months. And, back then.
Isn't that funny how we have our plan and it's like, God's got something else in store,
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I did stuff. I thought I was living, right? Like I thought I was living on the streets. And then I go to the ranch and I'm jumping out of barns and I'm going canoeing and, I'm throwing rocks at metal and just all this stuff, all these new experiences for me, having fire pits every Friday and doing things that like were really living. Like I experienced life in a new way. And that was the first time. And back then, I don't know if it still is, they would let you walk on the property and do whatever you wanted to do because their thought process was, where the hell are you going to go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's nowhere to walk to. There's nowhere. So we would walk down to the Piney River. And I really got reconnected with the God of my understanding. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time that I was able to really sit down and say, okay, this part of the God of my understanding it doesn't work for that doesn't really work into my image, but I can manifest him. I can create that pure love and no judgment God that I don't have to be angry at anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so I left there very, I was on a cloud nine. I don't believe in like the pink cloud of recovery because those of us that have copious amounts of trauma don't get, I wasn't, let me just say that. And I've talked to several other people that are in that same boat that we didn't get that. We didn't get that euphoria.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was I left the ranch and all that fear came back. I went to a sober living that was in a less than good part of town with some really intimidating people. And so that caused all that shield, right? All that armor to come back because that's what I knew. That was survival for me. Even though it wasn't necessary, my brain told me that this is where you're at. This is what you need to do. And so that started the cycle all over again. So fast forward, I think I've been to 13 treatments.
Wow.
I couldn't tell you how many times I've been to detox and crisis stabilizations, upwards of 30. They knew me at Vita back in the day. Vanderbilt was called Vita.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
They'd be like, "Hey, Emily, how are you?" The psychiatrist there, I never followed up with outpatient, and they all knew me, right? Like, it is not. At the time, it was almost like, okay, I'm gonna go home for a little bit, right? I'm gonna go lay down for a few days, and I would just run into detox and get some sleep and eat and get back on my meds and swear I was going to keep taking them, and then not, of course. So fast forward again, 2009, I had left a very abusive relationship in Miami, Florida, from someone that I had met at the ranch.
Wow.
Because that's always a good idea, right?
Oh yeah, treatment romance.
Yeah, it was great. I met this guy. He had fancy cars and fancy stuff, and he drugged me around the apartment by the hair of my head. We lived on the 23rd floor penthouse, so that part was great. But I still, and again, I wasn't willing to let go of that image. I drove a brand new Mercedes around Sunny Isles, Florida, getting the shit kicked out of me every day. So finally, his sister comes into the apartment and says, "If you don't leave, he will kill you." Wow. I like you enough to let you know he will kill you. And she paid for my plane ticket and sent me back to Nashville. My parents at that time said, you can't come home, but we'll pay for a sober living in Nashville. Because they knew that's where my recovery family was.
Yep.
So that's what I did. And I stayed in recovery for a little over 2 years behind that. I stayed in a recovery residence for over a year. It was the absolute right thing to do. I believe in long-term recovery residents. I believe in sober living, whatever you want to call it, halfway house, get in where you fit in and grow roots.
Yeah.
Anybody that knows 90 days just isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not. So anyways, I met a guy, right? I think I had 90 days clean when I met him. He was super good looking and all this, right? He was all the things. I didn't know he drove his mom's car. I didn't know he was living off of one of his friends, right? Because he was living in this house with a pool, and I didn't know it, and he had all the stuff. Well, none of it, I didn't know none of it was his. And by the time it came full circle and I realized that it was all smoke and mirrors, I was pregnant. So I took some really poor advice from my family and friends, and I married him.
Gosh.
I was told that if nothing else, if this marriage doesn't work, at least you all will have the same last name. And that made sense at the time, right? I've never, obviously it doesn't now, but at the time,
wow, yeah,
it made sense. So we married, and it was tumultuous to say the least. It wasn't, our relationship was never great. It was never healthy, but it wasn't abusive until the day we got back from our honeymoon. And I went to load the dishwasher, and he came in behind me and took everything out and said, now do it right. Yeah, I didn't load the silverware correctly. So that started, and I'm pregnant. And at this point, I feel trapped, and I'm encouraged by my friends and family to stay in this. So I didn't share what was really going on behind closed doors. Right. I didn't put that out there. I had my daughter on May 9th, 2011. And I started to feel all these things that I thought were unnatural and unhuman. I didn't connect with her. I didn't want her. I didn't know who she was or what I had done. And no one had explained to me what postpartum depression was. I thought it was sadness. I thought it was, all of the depression symptoms, and it's not. And no one, even the questionnaire you fill out at the OBGYN at your 90-day checkup is, have you been feeling, less enthusiastic? And it's just really benign, bland stuff. And, no one explained to me that postpartum depression is detaching or not able to connect with your child.
Right.
And so I had all this shame and guilt, and I thought I was a horrible person, and I didn't know what I had done. And I had a husband telling me that my daughter would be better off without me.
Wow.
So I left, and I used. At that moment in my life, it was use or take your own life. And that's not an excuse. That's the truth. And I've worked with my sponsor a whole lot on that. And if you don't have a sponsor, get one. I've worked with my sponsor for a long time on that. And she will even tell me that at that time, using is what probably saved my life. It's never an answer. It's always an answer. It's never a good one.
Right.
But in that moment, it was enough to keep me alive until, for another day.
Yeah.
So I could not get back on track. I went to this really fancy place in Maryville, Tennessee, that was super expensive and promised all of these things. And we had tea on Fridays, and it was super fancy, but that was about it. I could take therapeutic passes to go get my nails done and get massages, and somehow that was supposed to be therapeutic, but there was there was nothing. They've since closed, and the lady that owned it was on the run and some more shit, but that's a whole nother story.
Holy cow.
But maybe it's what I needed at the time. I don't think anything happens by accident.
Yeah.
But it was, it was a lot of money. And I came home from that, and I came into a husband that didn't know how to say nice things or encourage anyone. And I left and I couldn't stay. I didn't know. And I didn't know. I was so beat down. I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I look now at the person I am today, and I look at what I took back then, and I think, who is that girl? Like, who is that woman? I would never let anybody treat me like that.
Yeah.
But, it wouldn't, if I hadn't gone through that process, I probably wouldn't be the woman I am today. So,
right. Yeah.
So I was back and forth, and I'd get clean and I had some decent, I'd get 7 or 8 months and start seeing my daughter on every weekend and do all the things and then go use. And I just could not get it back together.
Yeah.
So I found out I was pregnant with my second child after I think she was was getting ready to turn 2. And I was pretty far along when I found out I was pregnant, because I was not taking care of myself at the time. I had been unmedicated for close to a year, and wow. I was less using, more suicidal. I think I had passive, and I had passive suicidal ideations for a solid year. I did not want to wake up. I didn't want to take my own life, but I didn't want to wake up either. Right? And so it was riddled in there. It was woven in with a little bit of drug use, but mostly I was just broken, and I didn't know. And I laid in my apartment by myself over in Old Hickory, away from my support, and I wished I was dead. And so when Davis was born, my middle child, I had drugs in my system. Mm-hmm. He somehow miraculously, by the grace of the God that I serve, did not. In his meconium and his amniotic fluid. It's just not humanly possible, and it happened.
Wow.
He had no drugs in his system, and I had all drugs in my system. I had all of them. Which ones? All of them.
Wow.
So we went to treatment together. We went to I was court ordered by DCS to go to a state-run treatment center. Mm-hmm. And it was extremely humbling. And because I had always gone to the biggest and the best, right? The most expensive, and all of my treatments were private pay. And I wore that shit like it was armor. Right? I can go back to treatment anytime I want to, and I'll go to some freaking voodoo magic hippie camp, and I don't have to go to Buffalo Valley or one of these places that the state, and not to say anything wrong with those treatment centers. They help a lot of people, but I believed I was too good for them.
Right.
And I ended up at the Rainbow Program, which was state run and state funded. You couldn't private pay there. It's all state funded, court ordered. And I met some really fantastic people there that were in really, really unfortunate positions and situations. And it was very humbling for me. And it made me realize that I am them, regardless of how I was raised, regardless of who my parents are, all of those things. I'm a low bottom junkie just like them. Maybe, and so
I remember having that realization in treatment. Our stories are very different, but I remember having that realization in treatment as well. And it was when I finally started to get it, finally started to get it, to want the program, see things for, coming into reality. Right. And that's one of the most powerful realizations I think we can have in the recovery process, is that.
Oh, sure.
It's,
Sure.
they talk, we hear it all the time in the rooms, until we start to see the similarities and stop trying to see the differences, we're not going to get anywhere.
It was Dawn Zerlinden at the ranch that said to me, you're really smart. And I said, you know what? I've worked really hard on that. And she said it wasn't a compliment. It took me a lot of years to realize what that meant. And in that moment, those kinds of moments, those aha moments like I had at Elam Center when I looked around and realized that I was one bad decision away from exactly where these people were. And my guilt and shame was worse because I had a kid there,
Yeah.
And I thought that's the one thing I dogged people out for using when they were pregnant or using with small children. And be careful what you say. I personally have always ended up in those shoes. Always. If I really had harsh, nasty judgment about somebody, I always found myself there. And I guess that's God's way of making things really, really crystal clear for me because I'm hard-headed, right?
Yeah.
So I was at Elam Center. I completed my 90 days there, and I got a recovery apartment. Nashville has this really cool program of recovery apartments through Urban Housing Solutions. And they're super nice and they're gated and they're based on your income. So it was perfect. It was just me and him in a 1-bedroom, really nice apartment in a gated community with a playground and all of the things, right? He was 3 months old when we moved in there. And about a month later, one of my best friends, who was also a drug dealer, got out of jail. And he called me and we started hanging out just as friends and doing the things he was proud of me for being in recovery and proud of me for being in recovery. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was, well, can you run me here and can you run me there and all, and running back and forth. And I knew what he was doing. I did it for too long. And eventually I said, let me in. I'm broke. Right. And so it took about 6 weeks for me to finally use after I started selling drugs with him. And that's longer than it's ever taken me before.
Yeah.
I had a babysitter who was the only person I let watch my child. She was an ex-boyfriend's sister. She doted over Davis. She loved him. And I was very protective of him because it was just me and him against the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to let other people, but I just watch him or be a part of him. And I just couldn't. She was the only one I trusted. And so when I took him to her and I said, I don't know how long it's going to take for me to get my life together, but please love my son like he's your own until I can. She said, he's mine too. He's been mine from the beginning. I've got this. So it took, I guess, about 3 weeks into my using. This was right before Christmas that I relapsed, and I'd been over there at Christmas and been over there at New Year. So I had not seen him, but I definitely wasn't participating as his mother at that time. And about 3 weeks into my relapse, I get a phone call from this young woman who says, I think something bit your son on the arm and I can't take him to the hospital because he's not mine. Can I come and get you and we'll go together? I said, of course. So she comes and gets me. We go to the hospital. They start looking. His blood work's fine. Everything's fine. The lady says, I'm going to do an x-ray. I said, do an x-ray. He's got a bite on it. I mean, it's clearly a bite. And he's moving around. He's moving his elbow. Everything's fine. So they do an x-ray and he's got a severe break in his arm. Both of his, I don't remember the names of the bones, both of the bones right where his elbow meets his upper arm were fractured.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And there was bone fragment and all this stuff. So it was pretty intense injury. So she says, listen, we don't have a pediatric orthopedic here. We've got to transfer you to Vanderbilt. I said, okay, let's go to Vanderbilt. Everything's fine. It was an accident. He was sleeping in the bed with them. It all made sense. It all connected. So we go to Vanderbilt. Sorry I'm taking so long on this story. This is my end of the road.
Yeah, no, you're good.
we go to Vanderbilt and they say, listen, with his age and his inability to tell us what happened, we have to do a full body x-ray to make sure there's no other broken bones and everything's fine. I said, yeah, do what you do. I know he's fine. He's been with my best friend, right? And her husband, and they have raised him like their own. And this woman comes back and her face is stoic. And she has a computer screen. She has one of those mobile, like x-ray showers. I don't know what you call it.
Yeah.
And she comes in and she says, I need you to sit down. And so I sit down. I'm in a glider because we're in the pediatric ER. And that's, there's a glider in a crib and hold it. So I'm sitting in a glider and she starts pulling up frame for frame. And she shows me 17 frames of broken bones on my 6-month-old child. And then she shows me his eye. They had done, I think it was an MRI on his eyes once they started seeing the injuries, and he had 2 ruptured retinas. And I said, well, he must have brittle bone disease. This is my fault. It's from me using when I was pregnant. Like I've destroyed, this is my fault. Again, this is my fault. And she said, I'm a non-accidental injury specialist who goes all over the world to be an expert witness. I just happened to have my home at Vanderbilt. She said, I wish you were right. And we will do everything in our power to eliminate all other options. But I can tell you every one of these injuries has been sustained in their stages of healing in the last 3 weeks. So if he had brittle bone disease or something like that, he would have the stages of healing and the scar tissue would go way further back. So they immediately put police and security on, not on me, on the woman who had him, because she comes in saying, I've had him for the last 3, she never said, to this day, I never got an answer. Right. So we leave. I go back to my hotel. Davis is in NICU at Vandy and preparing for a surgery on his elbow, and they thought they were going to have to put rods and screws in, but they ended up not having to, thank goodness. But, they wouldn't let me take him home. And at that point he was in protective custody. So I wasn't even allowed in the room without DCS or police presence. Mm-hmm. And she had a restraining order and her husband had he still has an active restraining order until he's 18. I go back to my hotel and I am in shock. Right. And I use, because that's my coping skill. Yeah. And the next morning I get a call from someone who says, hey, where are you? Just random person. This is Officer so-and-so. Where are you? And I'm like, listen, are you coming to arrest me? Tell me the truth. He said, no, I'm an off-duty officer. And I said, well, what are you here for? He said, I'm here to serve you. He said, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm here to serve you a termination of parental rights. And I have to serve it in person. I'm like, God, the state works quick. They're already trying to terminate my parental rights. He's been in the hospital for 48 hours. So I dodged this guy for a day or two because I just didn't want to face it. And I finally meet up with him in the Taco Bell parking lot. And it's a termination of parental rights for my daughter. And my ex-husband and his new wife wanted to adopt her. And so in a very short span, I go from, in essence, losing my son to horrific abuse and looking at the prospect of never seeing my daughter again. And it was so heavy and I was so broken. I had 2 choices, 2 very distinct choices. I've been at this crossroads several times in my life, but this was the one that was really distinct, really black and white. And it was lay down and die or get up and fight. And there was no option. There was no middle ground. There was no, let me see how this works out. I'll go back to treatment and see how it plays out. There was none of that. It was those 2 things, lay down and die or get up and fight. And my mom I called my mom and I said, she's my best friend. I called my mom and I said, I've been served with a TPR. They're trying to terminate my parental rights for Ava, my daughter. And she said, my mom doesn't cuss. She's a very Christian woman who believes that profanity is it shows a lack of intelligence, right? She's one of those. And she said, well, you've fucking done it now, haven't you?
Business.
And she wasn't wrong. And she said, Emily, there is no person in this world that can fill the mom-shaped heart in a little girl's, a mom-shaped hole in a little girl's heart. But she said, you have to fight for her. And so I did. And so I didn't know if I was coming or going. I didn't know if I was going to stay clean. I didn't know anything. All I knew was that I had to, someday I was going to have to answer to her. Someday, whether it be tomorrow or on her 18th birthday, I would have to answer to her and explain to her what happened, right? Like why I wasn't there. And so I felt like I owed her at least one more fight. Yeah. And I felt like I owed that to her, especially with Davis and all of this heavy stuff on me. That I thought was a fight that was tangible, that it felt different. It wasn't as debilitating. Mm-hmm. So all of this is happening in the same week, mind you.
Wow.
So in the same week, I get a call from DCS, and the lady that was my DCS worker, who I pray for to this day, happened to be a member of Narcotics Anonymous. And happened to know a lot of the same people that I knew, and knew enough about me to know that I know how to be clean if I want to be.
Yep.
And so she picked me up every day after she got off work to take me to see my son, because I wasn't allowed in there without her. And if it was for 30 minutes or an hour, she took me up there every day. They wouldn't place him out of state, even out of county, because of his abuse case. And I have no one here to take him. My whole family's back in West Virginia. So she said, let's find somebody, da-da-da-da. I said, there is nobody. He's, we're going to have to take our chances in foster care because there's nobody, I don't have anybody here.
Yeah.
Just so happened that someone at a 12-step meeting was gossiping about me. And someone that I've known for years and I lived with in a sober living 12 years ago overheard the conversation. And she reached out to me on Facebook and said, I don't know what's going on. I don't even care. I know you need help. What can I do? Mm. And I said, just pray for me. There's nothing to do. And she said, can me and my partner, do you trust me? Can me and my partner take your son? It's on our hearts. God has told us that we're supposed to help you. Can you take your son? So we start that process. They moved from White House to Davidson County in 4 days to make sure they had an apartment in Davidson County to take my child. And they did that. And they loved him and they loved me. And they, to this day, are a huge part of my child's life. They are his aunts, and they will forever be. And that happened, right? Like that whole scenario happened because of my investment in 12-step recovery at an earlier time.
Yeah.
And I believe that we create families in our recovery, in our recovery world. And I believe that we create relationships and bonds that are sometimes most more genuine and unconditional than our birth families.
Yep.
And this was one of those situations where she had no rhyme or reason for why she came out of the woodwork. And she will forever, I have a debt to her that I'll never be able to repay. So I got clean. I stayed clean. I went to a sober living. I did all the things that they told me to do. I got an attorney. We fought like hell. I took drug tests 3 times a week at a lab so I could just have visitation with my daughter for 2 hours a week. And I did all these things, and I did them for 2 years, and I never missed a drug screen, and I never missed a visitation. And so at the end of the day, when we went to court and they said, well, what is your grounds for termination? They're like, well, she was gone for a couple of years. He's like, yeah, but she's been back for 2 years. How is this going to work? So they withdrew. And I still don't have her full time. I share custody of her with her dad, and we have a very healthy relationship with boundaries now, right? And he doesn't get to talk to me any way he wants to. And we communicate well about our child. And her stepmother, who I don't think anybody's ever hated me as much as she did. I really don't. And we can even be civil and have conversations. Wow. And so miracles happen in recovery if you just don't use, right? They just do. But if you don't use and do the work in, like, shit gets so much better, so much more obvious, right? You can turn around sometimes and go, damn, how did that happen? Like, how did that come full circle? Like, how did I get here? And it's like, oh yeah, because I put the work in, right? So my son was in custody with his foster parents, his temporary placement, for about a year. I saw him every other weekend starting after 3 months, and then we went to every weekend, and then we went to every other week. And about a year into every other week, I went back and got full custody of him. And he is my biggest challenge, and he is the smartest. And that's the problem. He is the smartest child I have ever been around. He was articulate and having full adult conversations at 2, and I knew then I was in trouble. You know, I knew. But he's brilliant. He's brilliant. And then, and I guess I had about 2 years clean when his child abuser was finally indicted. It took them 2 years to indict me. And I had gotten a small recovery job doing drug screens for a recovery residence, and it kept me grounded, and it was enough to occupy my time but not be super invested in a recovery job, because that's gotten me in trouble before too.
Mm-hmm.
And too much too soon. And so I worked, and I had all this big stuff, right? Like, I had all this big recovery, big trauma on my heart, on my chest. And that's the one thing I've held on to. Like, I've gripped onto my trauma, and I just couldn't work. I just could not do it.
Yeah.
To this day, I don't know why, but I held on to it like armor. But this one was too big. It was too heavy. So it forced me to seek help. And I started at the SAC because I qualified and it was cheap. I have quite a bit of sexual trauma in my history, so that qualified me to go there. But I really went there to work on the child abuse trauma with my son. Yeah. And I stayed there for a year and a half. And then my therapist went on maternity leave, which I still blame her for. And then she started a private practice, and I see her to this day. And she is my lifeline on most days.
Awesome.
And I have a sponsor who has a sponsor. And And those are the reasons that I was able to overcome and be able to work through some. There's just certain things in your life you're never going to overcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
Find peace with. And so that's what I've looked for.
Yeah.
Eternal happiness is an unachievable goal.
That's right.
But peace in uncertain times is achievable. It's realistic. And so that's what I went for. That's my goal on a daily basis. But I had a job that was nothing. It was just a basic little drug screening job. It wasn't nothing. It was very important at the time, but it wasn't super invested in clinical and all those things. It was just, and then this indictment comes up, and I call my boss. I'm like, I think I have to quit. And she's like, well, why do you have to quit? And I'm like, well, because I've got this coming up, and I just don't think it's appropriate for me to be there. And she said, Emily, life shows up. Like we may be exactly what you need. She said, not necessarily the residents, but the staff. She said, need us. And she explained it in a way that I probably won't be able to articulate well, but she said, I've been through a lot, and I've been through 2 divorces, and I've been through putting my child in treatment multiple times while I worked here. And I believe that I would not have survived those experiences sober unless I had someone to stay sober for. And this company was it. And so and she said, recovery is about me. It's always about me. But there are times in our lives that we have to look around and say, why am I doing this? Yeah. Right. If it's all the time, it's probably not healthy. I don't know. But if it's, momentary lapses of sanity that I can hone back in on, I can't let these people down. Yeah. And that's okay. And so I stayed working, and I worked, and she started letting me do a few groups, and they were light groups. They weren't like, trauma and focused or anything like that. It was life skills and vision boards and pretty stuff. And, and I kept my eye on the prize, right? Like I was able to look at my life and the life that I had built and the people that depend on me, not just at work, but at home. And I was able to say, my life is bigger than this. The way for me to stay clean for, God willing, almost 7 years is to have created a life that I have that is not worth losing.
That's right.
Right. To create a life, people in a life, and substantial elements that I just couldn't live without. And I've never had that before. It's easy to go use when you're in an abusive relationship. It's easy to go use when you don't really have any friends. It's, but now, like, I've created a life that I would lose so much. I can't, I got married. I just got to throw this in. If I'm talking too long, let me know.
No, you're good. We got a few more minutes. So okay. Yeah, definitely want to hear about how your life now, what the, the joy and everything. So
of course. So I got married in October of 2000. Oh my God, he's going to kill me. I think 2016, something like that, somewhere in there. Yeah. No, it was October of 15. Sorry. October of 15. And he is the love of my life. And he has taught me how to teach people to treat me, right?
Yeah.
If that's not redundant, I don't know what is. He treats me like a human, and he treats me like a person of worth and of value. And I've never had that before. And I think if I had that before, I may take it for granted.
Yeah.
But I think because I haven't, I think that's why we work so well, because he's been in some pretty crappy relationships too, where he was on the other end of it. So we respect each other, and we respect our positions and our histories, and we get along really well. And he loves my middle child like he is his own. He loves my daughter too, but he is the stepfather, right? we are in the process of him adopting my middle son, who is not his biological child. They are more alike than he is his own. I have a youngest child who is 5, who is my mini-me. He is emotional and sensitive and hard on the outside and soft on the inside. And he's all the things that I am. He's very animated. He's very funny. He's a clown. But he's sensitive. You know, I can't imagine spanking him. He gets his feelings hurt. One of those kids. Yeah. So I don't know. I've created this life from a girl who never thought she would have kids.
Yeah.
To being a mom of 3 children, and I work and I do, I just bought a new car. It took me 7 years, but I just bought a new car, new car. It had 13 miles on it when I drove it off the lot, right? Like, who does that? And it just takes, it takes time and it takes effort, and it's taken a lot of perseverance, and it's taken a lot of, most importantly, patience.
Yeah.
Because I think we were talking about it before this. I was in a situation where I was effectively living trauma in my recovery, where most people recover from trauma, or post the trauma, right, when they find recovery. I didn't get that option. So I had to face a lot of stuff head on as it was happening in real time in recovery, and not put any dope on top of it. That was really uncomfortable, but it took, I don't give myself enough credit on most days, but I was kind of a badass through that. I kind of had to like man up and do some uncomfortable shit.
Yeah. I remember you telling me that you were forced to not speed through processing that trauma, which is something that I think is many of us tend to navigate towards, or we just want to, it's uncomfortable. So we're like, let's get it done.
Right. You want to get the other side of it. And so, in history, in my 13 treatment centers I went to before, I wanted to like do the Cliff Notes version, right? Like hurry up and speed through. This is what happened. I'm good now. And so I don't need therapy. I don't need any of these things. But this time I didn't get that opportunity.
Yeah.
Because it was actively, still going on.
Yep. Well, I'm not surprised to hear how, the peaks and valleys of your story and how amazing the transformation has been, because I've known you in recovery and the wonderful person you are. And I know, the some of what you've shared with me in the past of, what from your old life, but this is truly an amazing story. And I'm so glad that we were able to make it happen for you to come share it with me and everyone watching. I wanted to ask you real quick, what are you doing in the recovery world today that you can share with our viewers, and can they possibly connect with you in a certain way?
100%. So I guess last September, so we're working on about 18 months now, I bought an existing recovery residence down in Bellevue with a couple of my fellow coworkers at the time who have turned into family. And we are really tight knit, and we are a small community. We have about 20 beds, male and female, and we really focus on life skills and on building self-worth and self-esteem. We don't just primarily work with substance use disorder. We also work with eating disorders and primary mental health. And so, what we found is that a lot of people looking for long-term recovery residents can only find substance use disorder programs. And so we've offered, we've found a way to offer full service recovery residents, because the reality of it is everybody's recovering from something.
Mm-hmm.
Childhood, or trauma, or mental health. You don't have to have a substance use disorder to be in recovery. And that's really what we focus on. So the name of our program is New Vision Recovery. You can find us at newvisionrecovery.org, or you can always reach out to me. My cell phone number is on the website.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, you, again, I'll repeat myself from earlier, are truly doing some great work in the recovery community, changing lives. And I'm so grateful to have you as a friend, colleague, fellow recovery, all the things. So thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for being who you are and bringing light and joy to this world. It's better because of it. So final thought. I always like to ask our storytellers, what do you want to leave our viewers with? If you were talking to that man or woman that's struggling similarly to your story, what's that last word of encouragement that you would say to them today?
If a hopeless junkie like me can have a life worth living, anybody can.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
And it doesn't matter how many times you go to treatment. They all piece together for a reason. And
that's right.
From recovery.
Yep. Some people need more, and it's okay.
Right.
Yep.
None of them were a waste.
That's right. That is right. Well, I will leave with the final thought of saying thank you all again for watching. If you are struggling today, one thing that I would ask you at the very least, if you can't do anything else, tell someone, tell another person. And if you have the courage, I would absolutely encourage you to either reach out to us at Promises on our information scrolling beneath your screen, or call Emily at New Visions. They're a wonderful resource, and we are so grateful to have them here in Nashville as well. With that, I want to say, be kind to one another and take care of yourselves. And that concludes our recovery.